Welcome back to this episode of Shapes of Grief. I'm joined by Addison Brasil today, author and somebody who knows grief pretty well. Judging from your book, Addison, you're really welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you hail from North America, but you're in London at the moment. That was handy for me. It was easier to organize the time
Yeah.
with you being this side of the world.
Yeah, it works out better with the time zones. And I'm having a very typical London day. I can't really decide what's going on. It's raining, then it's cloudy, then it's sunny, just very, very resembling of grief. The
Okay.
London weather, always changing.
Yeah, it's actually really nice you say that because I often use that analogy with people
Mm.
I'm supporting. You know, it's like the weather, it'll come through you, but it will pass. You know,
Absolutely.
and equally the good times will come and move through you and they will pass too. So yeah, it's a lovely analogy. So Addison, where does your journey with grief begin?
I mean, I guess where I really tuned into grief, I'm sure I had, many, not smaller as in to measure it, but grief throughout my childhood, things like a divorce between my parents or just the loss of my first grandparent. But I suppose that I really tuned into it and it kind of was right there with me in my loss of innocence, kind of. I was about 19 years old when my brother died of an inoperable brain tumor. And he had battled that for about 4 years. So it was this sort of long process with so many peaks and valleys of he's going to be fine. He's pulled through. There's been a miracle to, it might only be 6 months. And that happened many times in 4 years. So when it finally did happen that my brother passed, it was like you realize no matter how much you think you've prepared, you can never really prepare for it. Once real unchangeable grief knocks on your door, it seems that it's like something you've never really known. At least it was for me.
And it's interesting what you're saying there about the 4 years that preceded your brother's death. That unknown time, where there's hope, there isn't hope.
Hmm.
Maybe there is hope, there isn't hope. Would you speak a little bit about what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're diving back like almost, I can't believe I'm at an age now where I can say 15 years ago and I was still an adult at that time.
You're
But
still a baby to me.
um, yeah, it was really interesting because it was all during my high school career that this was all happening. And I danced at a very high level. I went to a school in the city that I had to audition for, and I was competing on the weekends and honestly was having an amazing high school experience for the most part. I mean, I just got to do what I loved and it was so much fun. And then in juxtaposition, my brother was, dealing with a terminal illness and we're only 2 years apart. And it was just a very weird dynamic, especially being the slightly older brother. It was just so odd. But he had this magic about him. Like when I think back, I really can't believe how magical it was. Because sometimes, I'm having a bad day and I'll let everybody know. We always joke that if it was my older sister or I that had been diagnosed, we would have just laid down the first day and said, okay, let's play everybody takes care of me until I go. But that was not my brother. He just had this sense of humor about him and he was always sort of taking care of people. So in that childlike state that I was still in, kind of, I think I really believed, at least for the first, I don't know, if his battle was 4 years, for the first 3 years and 250 days, I really believed that, the miracle could happen. I really truly believe this was not something that could happen to him, that could happen to us, to our family. I just believed it, and maybe because I just had to believe it. But it was a very interesting experience because hope was just so important to me, and I also was sort of careful that I didn't want to build it up in a way that I would feel hopeless if what the doctors were telling us would factually happened. I became very, very. My brother decided to do this charity event at his high school to help other children and families with brain tumors, and I actually found out about it in the newspaper. Like that was my brother. He didn't even tell us to come. He just did it for the right reasons, and I was really inspired by it. And at the end of my first year of college, I came home, and that's sort of when they said, for real this time. And it was the first time that my brother looked me in the eyes and told me that he was done, that he had done everything he could do, and he didn't want to do any more experimental treatments or any more chemo or radiation. And I think in a way he was sort of letting me know, like, you need to also like support mom and dad, like, because I'm done. And really from the moment that he was done, it all happened very quickly over the next 3 months.
Mm.
And that's just, I can't really explain what, like, that's sort of just for me the ultimate loss of innocence of having your younger, hysterical brother who's like the light of the earth and everybody's best friend, annoyingly so. Will talk to anyone, make friends with anyone, kind of look you in the eyes and accept his own death, like preeminently in a way. And it was just so odd, and it was so quick from there. So I did throw myself into service, which is a theme we'll probably notice, where I think about the other people who might be going through it, and they have a little bit less access to community, a little bit less access to privilege. How is it for them? Because we were very well supported, especially by the community, and it was difficult. It was impossible. It was the hardest thing I had ever been through. So yeah, I ended up starting an organization with him. I mean, at the stage he was beginning to, not even be able to speak. So we were doing things, I'd show him things, he'd give thumbs up, thumbs down. And there was like 20 of us, all different ages, a lot of young people that came together just like, and we were like, we're going to do this, we're going to make a dent. And so we'd have these board meetings downstairs in the dining room, and he'd be upstairs, like palliative at this point, in his bed. And, I'd go up after and tell him what was going on. And, it became sort of the symbol of the organization, which is called Team Brother Bear, because we used to call him Brother Bear. That was his nickname. And it became sort of the symbol for the thumbs up, because we kind of all met him where he was no longer communicating verbally. So, in every picture we ever did, every like event, every check signing in memory of him since, we would do like the thumbs up. And so it was something he inspired, and then we built together. But I certainly was more of my A-type perfectionist 14 years ago and jumped into like, how can I change this? And I think very innocently, even in that last 60-day stretch, there was a part of me that was like, if I pump enough good into the world, can I get my Hail Mary? Can I get my miracle? And that was just like, I mean, I was a kid. Of course I believed that
Yeah.
could happen,
But you've never experienced the worst before now, and I think it's so hard to conceptualize somebody dying when we've never experienced it. It's
Right.
that doesn't happen. It's like we don't have access to it. It's not quite denial. I think it's just we don't have access to certain things unless it's our lived experience. It's very hard to understand systemic racism if you're not living it every day,
Right.
unless you sit down, sit back and start listening and tell me. And, and even at that, you only ever have one very far removed perspective. And I think, with terminal illness and somebody's potential death looming, when we've not had that in our life, it's very hard to download what that might be like.
Yeah, and
So
that's such a, do you bring that up? It's so true, because I constantly, like, one of the inspirations for writing the book, which I wanted it to be something you could give to somebody right away, like on the first day, which is why I call it First Year of Grief Club, a gift from a friend who gets it. And with that, it was funny, because when people would call me and say, so and so has just gone through this, I feel like you're the only person who would know what to do for them, or what should I do? And I would sort of freeze. And as you're saying that, it really strikes a chord, because it's like, can I just speak to them, because they've just went through this portal into the grief land that the person who's trying to help maybe hasn't been through. And there's going to be, just like you're nodding right now, there's going to be a lot more just nodding and visceral understanding between the two of us, rather than like me telling you how you can help them. There's a lot that's inferred, because it's just this thing where you totally believe this is reversible until you absolutely have to believe that it is not. And unless you, like you saying, until you don't know. And
those words you just used, Addison, you said this visceral understanding. And I think this is where it's key, because I just came out of another interview. Someone is doing some research and interviewed me. And she asked me, during my psychotherapy training, or any trainings, was I prepared to work with people who are grieving? And I said, absolutely not.
Mm.
Absolutely not, because it's a cognitive, top down, information giving education. And grief is mammalian, it's like
Hmm.
we become animals again. And, listeners to the podcast will know I say this over and over again. It's visceral, it's somatic, it's
Yeah.
in our cells, in our bones, in our blood. And the only thing our thoughts do is give us meaning, help
Hmm.
us make sense and meaning of this visceral experience. Would you talk a little bit about what you know to be true for you, and for everyone it's different, about what grief feels like in your
Hmm.
body?
Yeah. So as you're saying that, I'm really inspired to share, and also sort of selfishly to hop through the other two deaths that I went through. But as somebody who, so in the span of about, I guess it would be 10 years, yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, yeah, exactly 10 years. Um, After my brother passed, 4 years after, I found my father from his suicide, which was the complete opposite of, this sort of, we had this summer of goodbyes and surrounding my brother and love. And this was like quite, obviously unexpected and shocking, a totally different thing. And that's when I started to first realize that even for you, every grief process is completely different.
Yes.
One barely prepared me for the other. And I still get, goosebumps when I say that, because it's so weird that, people are like, did you carry over? There were certain things, but there's also just, it was almost more difficult for me because with my brother, I had done, when you say what does grief feel like in your body, I remember this, like it's like being heartbroken or ghosted times like 100. And I remember these nights where it literally hurt my heart inside of my body. Like I could felt like someone was squeezing my heart with their fist and like breaking my ribs open. And it would get to a point that I was screaming and crying to whatever was above, just please, 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 like let and you hear people talk about that, but you think, well, I probably won't end up doing that, but you have to try. I mean, I made deals where I was like, I go tonight, he's here tomorrow, we switch them out. Like I tried absolutely anything to kind of give him his life back, even if it meant that I would never know the difference and I wouldn't be here. And in those moments, it was logical. It's like, it's like if someone was physically hurting you, the things you would do and say to try to get it to stop, right? You go into that mode, and there's nothing like, I don't know, more human in those moments than like, this is happening to my whole body, my whole mind, my whole soul, my whole heart. And I will say and do anything to try to get a reversal, to try to fix it, to try to heal. And my mindset at that time was always very driven by, results, fixing, perfection, so how do I beat this? How do I change this? And it's not till much years later, and the theme of the book, where I realized this isn't something you can fix. It's just something that you get to honor every single day for the rest of your life. And there's going to be those days where, the heart, that sensation. And then there's also these like weirdly calm days, like yesterday, where I just like felt so protected by the sun and the wind, and I just was just at full ease. And for me, what I spent so much time doing between my brother's death, my father's death, and then later my friend's death, when I was in a very bad accident that left me relearning to walk and killed my dear friend. Again, completely different grief process, and sort of the final push into sort of how do I show up in the grief space. And it was then that, I really went into overdrive trying to fix it. Like, how can I fix this? And it was like this ultimate surrender eventually, to just realize, like, there is no fix. Like, you're in the club now, and this is every day, and we're just going to honor this every single day. And the only way through is to just remain curious, compassionate, and kind to yourself. Those were not things I was doing to myself, like very hard on myself, like in a way I felt like the non-fictional Harry Potter. I was the boy who lived, as much as everybody's like, people would say you have the worst luck in the world. You were right there for all these three events, all in your 20s. And then there's this other part of me that was just like sort of overrun with a mix of like guilt and like gratitude of like, yeah, I was just to the left every time. And so I still got to be here. I still got to, get my extraordinary artist visa and move to Los Angeles and, write and create an app and like do all these things. So it's this really weird thing where, my sense of humor would be like, well, it's not me I'm worried about, and kind of look at the person who's standing next to me, because in our family, we really use humor to get through a lot. And that's just who I am. And then they get kind of uncomfortable, but I'm like, it's not me that I'm worried about, trust me. Um, but yeah, so it's, what I guess I was trying to get at and also kind of get us through, because it's just so much grief in 10 years, was that every process is just so different. And even when someone says, I lost my father too, or I lost my brother too, or I've been in a similar situation, I just kind of lean back and listen, because I know that it was never helpful for me whenever somebody would kind of say, I know exactly what you're going through, and just kind of button it. Because it's just so different. It totally depends on what your relationship with your brother or your father or your friend was, like what you're grieving, what the loss was, what was unsaid, what was said. It's just, they're so different. So I just didn't want to approach the topic. Two things that were very important to me is one, that I did it as a peer, as another person in the grief arena. And it would just be like, if you were at the gym and you were like, hey, you seem to be doing well here, what are you doing to look like that? And I can say, hey, I can show you a few things, but I'm not a trainer, I'm not a doctor studying us from like an anatomy physiology standpoint. I'm in the arena too, and part of that is me saying, hey, I don't know when I wake up tomorrow to honor these grief journeys, how it's going to go. So I'm definitely not in a position of a hierarchy to like for sure be your grief guide, but I'll be your willing friend.
And it's so true, like none of us can be. None of us can be,
Mm,
because there's no such thing as normal in grief. There's no
mm-hmm.
such thing, because what's good and healthy for you can be completely destructive for me. We
Mm-hmm.
have to look at who we are, how we handle hard times, our
Mm-hmm.
attachment style, who has died, how they died, what our relationship was to them, how flexible are we emotionally, um what is our capacity, for hard things. It's
Yeah.
endless.
It seems more sometimes like it's more about getting to know yourself now inside the loss than it is about learning to live without someone. And I think that gets missed a lot. It's a lot more, and I think as humans we naturally try to avoid getting to know ourselves and spending time with ourselves and sitting in anything and honoring, and experimenting within that, like I try to get people to do. But it really is more of getting to know yourself now,
Yeah,
inside this loss, and just how it operates in your life, than it is about learning to, like, quote unquote, live without someone, you
yeah.
know?
It's interesting, Addison, because just like we know there's no stages of grief, I think we kind of have this myth in society as well of, we ask kids, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Mm,
And it's like you go through childhood and then you reach this plateau of adulthood where you're going to be married with 2.5 children and live in suburbia and da 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 da. And nobody ever tells us that life is an evolving, unfolding process. And
mm-hmm.
you might turn around in the bed and it's a man beside you, not a woman, or a woman beside you, not a man, or
Yeah.
you may end up being single, you may never become a parent, all these infinite possibilities, but we go along with this 400-year-old fairy tale. And it's so damaging, because then we have our first loss, or
Mm,
maybe brush with addiction or alcoholism or whatever hard thing comes our way. And then we think we just need to fix this, get through it, and then get back to our plateau. And
mm-hmm.
actually, life's not like that at all. It's like an unfolding, if we're lucky, an unfolding series of adventures that break our heart and fill our heart.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, it's different. For some, it can be quite smooth and level. For others, it can be extremely turbulent, which
Yeah.
I'm hearing for you for those 10 years of your life. What we call bereavement overload. But it's lovely what you're saying, like there isn't a way to fix this. And so often I hear people come in and they go, how do I get back to being me? How do I get back
Mm,
to normal? How long is this going to last? And it's like, you don't lose an arm if you've your arm amputated you don't lose it for 6 months
Right.
and then it
Yeah.
grows back, or it's
Yeah.
like it's gone, honey, and you've got to adapt to this
Hmm.
and learn to live without this limb. And in a way, when someone we love deeply dies, it is like learning to live without them, without this limb. And we can grow and adapt. But something you said there, that analogy of the weather,
Hmm.
not accepting our loss, trying to fix it, is like running out to the garden going, shit, it's raining, and trying to push the raindrops back up into
Yeah.
the sky.
Seriously. Yeah.
It's
And
like
I
that,
had a
it's like that
conversation
acceptance.
recently about that, and my friend and colleague, she's written this new book called Hopeless, and I think it just pairs so nicely with my book because it's all about hope. And as I say in my book, I'm such a big hope monster. But she uses the same analogy of when people have this idea that you can run out of hope or it's gone, and it's perfect for London. But when it's gray and cloudy, we don't walk around saying the sun is gone. We don't walk around saying we'll never see the sun again the second it gets covered up by clouds. We're very aware that it's still there. It's still in some way supporting us, giving us light, bringing warmth. Like we don't lose all of that logic. So I think it's in the exact same way where you're having these phases, and because this thing about grief and stages got passed down over time, you're thinking you're completing certain things, and it's just really not like that. The sun will go and the sun will come back, and the sun will go and the sun will come back. And it's a perfect analogy for honoring too. The way you quickly adapt without tying it to your entire well-being every morning when you go, okay, it's raining, so that's umbrella and raincoat. It's the same thing I'm trying to get people to do with the book, is to do an experiment every week to go, okay, I noticed that when I did this in that experiment, it served me more. It helped me better. It helped me adjust or adapt or be flexible or open, whatever it is. And so it's the same thing as it becomes this thing where, okay, well, it's raining, I'm going to reach for an umbrella. Okay, I'm noticing that I cannot stop comparing my grief to the way my sibling is going through grief. It's like, okay, I know that noticing and no longer comparing is like my umbrella too. Like, you have to remember and sort of build this toolkit. So I'm
Yes.
not trying to push a toolkit on anyone, because I know, again, it's so different for everyone. So it's this idea of, let's experiment. So it's raining today. What happens if you go out without an umbrella? And well, you sit through the whole rest of the day damp, and not being hard on yourself, but going, okay, you know what? Yeah, next time I'm going to go with a tool that works for me, and I'm going to adapt as soon as I notice that it's raining, rather than, trying to push it away.
This is great. What I'm really hearing from you is the agency that you have built in your grief. And it's so refreshing, because a lot of people in the grief space, it's all about pointing the finger at how useless everybody else was to me when I
Mhm.
was going through grief. And I know that's a thing, and I know that's really painful. But, I think we'd be far better off to look at our own agency and what can I do? Because that is
Mhm.
within my
And,
control.
and what did work? Out of the
Yeah.
1,000 condolences that, trust me, like, I mean, I've gotten it, of course, I've gotten it all. I've gotten every type of text message, and I know a lot of people in this space do talk about this a lot. But what was the one that did change it for you? What was the one that did serve you? What was the one, okay, let's really focus on that and build something out of that, than focusing on everything that didn't work. And it's like, again, the weather, you can see the gray cloud literally forming over people's heads of, this is just my life now. And again, it's not fixed. It's every day I wake up and I honor it. Like, I have to keep saying that out loud for myself as well, but if I thought that way, I quite honestly don't think I would be here. Like, it's just like you said, I've never heard bereavement overload, but yeah, the computer was full, and breaking, and had viruses, and like, I mean, I was just not built for that level of loss
Yeah.
during what is also normally, your 20s. There's so many grief processes that aren't death related that you go through, the, jobs, what you thought it would be, like you were saying, letting go of whatever your fairy tale was, or what was supposed to happen by the time you're 24, 25, 26. We have all these other grief processes that everyone's going through as well, that you're going through at that same time. So for me, it was just sort of like you said, yeah, a total overload, and just having to just like kind of slow it down and like step back and be like, I don't think I'm going to make it to 30 if I don't change the way I think about this, because the victim part of it was just too easy. It was there on a silver platter for me. I mean, and if I leaned into that at all, and I would have been well supported. People who were loving me and supporting me were like, helping me be a victim in a way,
Yeah.
lovingly, like, no, because they just wanted to be supportive, and so it was very hard to start to, I worked with a coach for many years, like learning to teach people how to treat you and, letting them know and sort of not going down. There's two types of conversations I find whenever we talk about grief. There's like the spiral, and at the end of it, you feel like agitated, hyperactive, kind of existential crisisy, like just death is like living in you and it just doesn't feel good. And then there's this other type of conversation that I never knew you could have, where you can talk about it and honor it and acknowledge it, but then very much stay responsible and responsible in a way that you can continue on with your day. And it does go up from there. It's a very easy trap to get. People are just genuinely interested. It's like they're watching Netflix sometimes when they ask me about my life, like, and it's very easy to go down the way we understand story, down those like the hardest plot points and the struggle and the overcoming.
This is really good points you're making here, because we've come from a society that won't talk about dying, death, and grief, and but we don't want the pendulum to swing to the total
Mm-hmm.
other direction either,
Yeah, no.
where let's all be miserable. And I think what we're talking about here is very much the opposite of toxic positivity. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
we're not sort of like whitewashing this or just think positive, you'll be fine. What you're talking about here, correct me if I'm wrong, but is really accessing your choices in
Mm-hmm.
grief. And this is not to pretend that your heart hasn't broken several times, but it's, I have a broken heart in several places. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
And am I going to allow life or someone else or randomness to decide that now what?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I going to see if I can find my agency to actually take the steering wheel of this bus that's my
Yeah.
life, and do something with this that
Yeah.
I can live with, and
Mm-hmm.
that not only that I can live with, but that I can possibly thrive again, maybe even be happy again, contemplate
Yeah.
making love again, and living a good, joyful life.
Mm-hmm. It's
Is
almost
that
as you say
available to
that.
you?
Yeah, I think it's that. And as you're saying that, I'm just like, I wish I spent more time from the beginning working on accepting that I was a fully flawed feeling human being with a range of emotions that regulate constantly. Like accepting that rather than just this idea of working on accepting death. It's very different to accept that, like to work on accepting that this will always be changing, this will always be different. There's these things, and I could, like we said earlier, I could go into like there's certain, like when people would say everything happens for a reason to me, I sort of seize up, or especially when you're looking at sort of what I've been through, and not even for me but just for those around me. But there are these things, but then this too shall pass, time heals all wounds. Like, I mean, I can go in on any one of those platitudes, as a grief arena member, but then you do start to see is what is that like really saying, and what do I need to accept here to have that agency? What would actually lead to that agency? And it's not accepting that people die and the person I love is dead and they're never coming back. It's not. That's what I feel like. That's what I at least digested from society, that I was quote unquote working on or trying to get a result from. And it's really not that at all. They don't, they're not, nobody is any ever less dead. And I hate to say it that way, but that does not happen. I, as the loving, compassionate human being that I was brought up to be, I don't think I get to a day in all my time on earth where I go, yeah, everything happens for a reason. Like, I get now that my brother and my dad aren't here. Like, it's just, that's not for me, and working towards that blindly was definitely not for me. That was not going to gift me the agency that we're kind of talking about, and also like I invested heavily. I mean, I, to the point of bankruptcy at one point, of just going to the ends of the earth with whether it was coaches, healing modalities, trying to just understand how we really work as humans, and how, like you're saying, that flexibility would really have to show up for me to not just survive, but like thrive. And I, 5 years ago, would roll my eyes if somebody said that on a podcast. Like I really would. But now I can look at my life in a way in certain areas and I'm going, no, like given this scenario, like that's definitely thriving because I've been just surviving and that's very different existence. That's very different existence.
Yeah.
That's, you know, we wake up and we look at the weather and pull the covers back over and days pass, you know, that you're
Yeah.
surviving. You have a pulse, you're still here, you know, that's that. I think thriving, you know, in the new age coaching Instagram world gets a bad rap, but thriving is like what we're talking about, where you can accept and move into that agency. And it's not that you're going to enjoy everything, you're just accepting that you're a fully feeling human being, and every single day is going to have those ups and downs. And there are just a little things we can do, that we can ask for, that we can experiment in, that can just set us up just a little bit differently to get through it. You know, I think that's what it is. I wish I had like a retreat I could sell and, you know, grief will be gone at the end of the 3 days and the sun will set and we'll burn paper and we'll all be great, you know, like I wish. But I think that the only thing I can really offer to people is skip the 10 years where you're trying to fix something that's meant to be honored. It's really,
Oh, I love your wisdom. You're such a breath of fresh air. I
thank you.
love this. In that interview I did earlier with someone, I mentioned that I'm noticing a difference with younger people who are grieving. When I say younger, maybe under 40 or under
Mhm.
50. And what I'm noticing is, you know, I'm a couple of decades, I'd say, ahead of you, Addison. But when I grew up and when somebody would have a profound loss, people would say, oh, she'll never get over that.
Mm.
Just a statement. And that was like, okay, put on someone. You know, that's it. Widowed forever, or, and of course you're widowed forever, but you know, as in you're stuck in that fresh, you know,
Right.
grief for forever. What I'm hearing more and more from younger people is they're looking for their choices. They're going onto bereavement forums or they're following grief gurus, and they're seeing the anger and the bitterness and the dogma that can be there
Mhm.
as well. And they're saying, is that all? Is that I don't want that for me, actually. I
Yeah.
want to laugh again. I want to love again. I want to have a life that I'm happy in my skin in, you know. And it's back to these choices. And it's not even a choice. I think there can be a choice moment, but it's making choices again and again and
Mhm.
again and again until that becomes our pattern. And that's very different to denial. The choice
Yeah.
could be, I'm choosing to go and sit and cry in the corner of my bedroom because I've been ignoring this for 2 weeks, you know.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned, Addison, that there's a few tools that can help people get out of their ruts. What comes to mind when I ask you, what are they?
So again, this is where my, you know, my trap is, because I've designed this book where by doing these experiments you will identify your tools, right? Because, you know, mine are mine. When you say I don't know, do you get out of a rut? I don't know. Like, is there a specific tool to get out of a rut? I think that what's happening a lot in sort of the movement in mental health in general is we're seeing, like, of course it's come so far in 10 years, and I got to be a big part of that, working in a mental health startup for 2 years, 17 hours a day, specifically in men's mental health, and just really, you know, identifying. And I think what's happened is we have a lot of awareness around what's going on inside of us now, and we have like all these things being said to us about, yeah, take care of your mental health, or it's okay that you're not okay, or whatever that thing is that people are saying to you. And what's missing is the action piece once you have the awareness, because awareness without action is just drowning. And
Yeah,
I would almost call it a rut. You know, that's how I get into a rut, is when I'm kind of drowning in awareness. And my hyper thinkers out there, anyone listening to this can probably gather that I'm the type of person that can have like 1,000 thoughts at the same time, you know, and I think about everything. And it's just noticing, you know, what really works in that overwhelm for me specifically. And it is so different. And sometimes it is so simple. And I think one thing that we always sort of skip over is, like, it's the simplest thing, especially for death, because the number one thing that signifies that somebody has passed is that they're no longer breathing. right? I mean, that's, so basic. And it goes right into, it's almost as if they're handing the breath to you, the gift of breath to you, because I cannot believe how many times I have, really connected with myself and found different breathing exercises or really understood the science just behind breathing, which is, it's just too easy. It's literally, the opposite of death is life, and life equals breathing and pulse, and learning to work within those two things alone, and as I'm getting there. So I used to only really respond to my mental health and my grief when it was like 9 out of 10 and it was stopping me from doing
Yeah.
what I needed to do. I live very differently now. I'm responding at a 3 out of 10. I'm responding at a 4 out of 10. I'm bringing it back down to a 2 and noticing when it's up at a 6, and that can be in 15 minutes, but I'm very aware of how much I can do when I'm at a 0 to a 6 rather than only responding when you're sort of already in, like you said, either a rut or in a dangerous place, maybe mental health wise, and maybe even at a place where you really need professionals to help. You're sort of surpassing that peer support moment. This isn't about calling mom anymore. You're getting into like a little bit of a danger zone. And, it's just paying attention. The biggest tool I could give someone, which seems too obvious, is the tool of noticing, like truly noticing and without judgment, coming back to stay curious, stay kind, stay compassionate to yourself and to others. Where are you getting caught up in how someone didn't help you versus what would have helped you, and how you can plant that seed for yourself, and play around in that. I think there's a lot more play in this, and for me personally, a lot more humor than anything I was ever seeing, and that's what kind of really inspired me to move into the space, because I do feel like what's wild about me isn't these 3 plot points and that I was there for them. That's not the wild part. The wild part is like those are 3 plot points in a span of 10 years. And in between that, I'm, improving on comedy stages, making the best friends of my life, laughing, grateful, having family gatherings that just were all deeply connected and loving. And like, that's the wild part. So when I went back to look, I'm like, what allowed those moments?
Yeah.
Not how did you ignore the 3 things you never wanted to happen happening, And so it's like, it's so weird. What does the noticing tool look like? It can be anything, but if you physicalize it in your mind and like just go, okay, I'm in a place of judgment, I'm in a place where I'm trying to fix. No, 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 no. Let's just notice everything that's happened, everything that's led to this moment. It was raining. I knew it was raining. Did I grab an umbrella? This is such an easy point for me in the past to then go on berating Addison for 18 minutes about how he's so stupid for not bringing an umbrella when he knew it was already raining. That there's so many traps there. And so a lot of it for me is slowing down and noticing. And it seems too easy, but I am telling you, for instance, like a 4-7-8 breath or 5 minutes of nose breathing, or putting one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach and noticing which one is moving more, and then bringing that noticing into making sure your stomach's moving more. I know it's not going to fix your grief. It's not going to bring anybody back, but it will give you the immediate tool to honor what's happening in the moment and to stay response able, in that
Well, to
moment.
surf the wave rather than constantly trying to run away from it.
Right.
And this is the paradox of grief, isn't it? It's like, you said earlier about when you're in a rut, how do you get out of the rut?
Mm,
Paradoxically, it's by turning to the rut and embracing the rut
yeah.
and, listening to the rut
Hmm.
and engaging with the rut.
Yeah, and
Suddenly the
what is
rut's
this?
gone.
Yeah, what does this rut look like? No two
Yeah,
ruts are alike, but we
yeah,
classify them all as a rut.
mhm,
It's like, no, what is this? This rut is totally different. This rut has like sort of a bad Tinder date mixed in with a trigger, that's related to one of my grief processes, but not necessarily all of them. It's like playing Operation, or dewiring a bomb, very carefully. Is what
yeah.
is what is this rut? How did I get here? And how can I move out of it compassionately? And it becomes a thing where you do laugh to yourself and you do kind of go like, this is actually quite logical. If I was doing this for someone else, I would not be approaching this in this way.
Yeah.
And it's like literally like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I had this amazing analogy once. I admitted myself into a trauma unit after my my dad's death in Australia. I got away and I said, I need somebody to help me where I'm not being medicated to come out of the trauma. Even no matter how long I have to be here, I need to come out of it without medication, because then I'm just sort of numbing and then not ever, And so when I went there, and he explained to me my trauma in a way that nobody really ever had before, where, when I was saying, when you're from a 0 to a 10, and I think it's so true of mental health and grief, it's like you're putting glasses on, and you're taking them off and you're putting glasses on, and you're able to put and take off the glasses all the way up to a 9 out of 10. But then they become contacts, and they're not something to take out or not. And we live at that place where we have contacts in, and we've forgotten that our glasses are something that can come on and off, and then you're just seeing the world through those contacts. There's no, moments of awareness or using a tool to bring the glasses down and then, knowing that they'll eventually be back on. And when I think about that, I'm like, it's like, where's my glasses? Because like I'm so aware of, because we've all been there. And I mean, I was there 3 weeks ago, and I didn't realize for a week into it that I was wearing contacts for a whole week. Things just got gray and dark, and it's like a rut, or it fell through a trap door, where all of a sudden everything I know I didn't know for a whole week. And that happens. And the difference is that would then lead to me thinking, I will never get better. I will never be able to fix this. And it would continue and continue. And what happened differently this time was that noticing of, okay, the contacts are in, like, how can we got to, bring it up a little bit. We got to use the real tools here that we've learned over the years, to kind of get back to that point of glasses and kind of ground ourselves again, out of that, because it's so easy to happen. That sort of grief haze is so real and so easy, and it is sort of easy to fall through that trap of, this is unfixable. This is, so I am in a rut. Like you said, I am grieving forever, and it's like, wait, this is unfixable. So what does that mean? Then you go into that idea of, so I need to honor every part of this, not this is unfixable, so I give up. And this is just how it goes,
Yeah. Can I ask you about sexuality, Addison?
Yeah, absolutely.
The journey we go through when we realize that we're maybe not following that fairy tale that everybody set out for us. And there's such introspection involved with that.
Mm-hmm.
And we do start to develop, I think, that witness to ourselves. Well, there you were attracted to someone, but there you weren't, or sort of trying to figure out what's going on for us. And I think anyone who is LGBTQ plus develops that early on.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think your sexuality affected your ability to deal with grief? Kind of a random question, but I think it is relevant.
In some ways,
maybe
I'm probably one of the few, LGBTQ speakers or advocates that kind of would say this, but I would say in my younger years, and the way that it was approached in my life, in my home, which is just like the biggest homage to my mother and my father. I mean, way ahead of their time. But the gift in my sexuality was that I had fluidity. So I would have definitely classified myself, as bisexual from, a certain point. So I sort of, because it wasn't black and white, and I knew in my true heart of hearts that I'm a gray person. I put the gray space in the book. I love the color gray. It's my favorite thing ever. Like, but I live in the gray as a human being, and that's just the truth. Like, and there was no right or wrong. It's just the truth. And that's something that I always find myself repeating to myself, is it's not about right or wrong. It's what's the truth, and no one could tell me that who I am wasn't true, and luckily no one really tried to tell me that it wasn't true. I was very lucky in that way. Of course, I still downloaded it from everything I saw in the real world that, it would be better if I had married my college girlfriend. I mean, I had those feelings of, and when you have fluidity, that was where it became a struggle for me, is it felt like I could sort of choose. And that becomes very confusing, so I was really forced in that way to really look at what was coming up and try to be courageous about honoring it as it came up. When I felt like, much like grief, I could, take this back door and just not deal with any of it. luckily, I have this rare experience, and I just smile because I just don't understand. My mother was 18 when she got pregnant with my older sister. I mean, my mother was a child for half of our childhoods. Like, like I'm 33 and I'm like, I don't know if I would have this much grace and integrity. But there was just always this encouragement to sort of explore every part of you, and whatever you brought to my mother's kitchen table was welcome to eat. And so everything I learned about sort of, I guess, mental health and sexuality that in a negative framework or a deconstructive way came from outside. um, and um, and so I think the gift in that, when it came to grief, was just this, is so similar. And I was on a podcast recently, at the Gay Men's Brotherhood, and we sort of got into this, and you sort of realize that there is this grief process with any sexuality. There's grief process with any sort of romantic, especially if you end up with one partner. There's these mini grief processes that we don't acknowledge, of just whenever you thought something was going to be a certain way and it's not that way, and it's meaningful to you, which is basically every date you go on from 15 to 29, or how old am I, 33, so it's really interesting how I have this very privileged sort of version of feeling like I got to drown in acceptance, and I did drown. I sort of wanted rigid lines, and I wanted rules, because if I could have just, if they were telling me it was bad, then with my fluidity, I could have, it was great. We lived in Connecticut, had 2 kids, it was fine, and I had these parents that were always like, are you honoring your whole self? And they'd be like, stop saying that. What do you mean by that? And it also had something very rare, that there was fluidity within the siblings as well. And, I'll only speak for myself because I'm the only public facing member of the family. But we just had this magical thing. And so the journey of, I got to go to my sister's wedding last month in Australia. She's married a beautiful woman who just, centers her, and is like, I just smile because it's everything I've ever wanted from my sister. And I can't tell you how many times over the years our journeys have shifted as to whether or not that would be the moment. Or, like you were saying, everybody had me pinned in life for kids first, married first, I was this A type. And everybody, I have done nothing but buy baby gifts for the last year, and go to other weddings and whatnot. It's just so funny. It's just, there's grief in that. It's just not the way you thought and everybody thought it was going to work out. And the gift in it is that I did get to take a little bit more time. I think that any long-term relationship, had I just jumped into it within these grief processes, would have, like it did, or more of them would have failed ultimately, when I got to this point sort of that I'm at now, where I'm grounded in it and I'm able to show up fully. It would have been very hard to be kept to sort of a standard from years ago, when I've been experimenting in grief full time for 3 years, and it's just, I'm not the same person I ever was. So yeah, very long-winded answer.
Yeah, but it's so,
But
so
yeah,
many
I'm
great
grateful that you
points.
asked.
I think as well, I know that a lot of LGBT people say when they lose a partner, a same-sex partner, they really want to find an LGBT grief group, where they want to know,
Mhm.
they don't want to have to keep coming out again. And, hetero grief groups, that's what I've heard from a few people. And that makes sense, if you want to sit there and talk about your wife, if you're a woman.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering what it was like for you, because you didn't lose a partner, you lost a brother, you lost a parent, and you lost a friend.
Mhm.
Did, and I'm curious, I don't know the answer to this, or if there is a general answer, was there anything there that your sexuality meant you had different needs to other people?
Yeah, it's funny, as you say, you didn't lose a partner. I lost many at the same time. So it was this compounded thing. And when I was saying earlier that we all are grieving throughout our 20s, it's all those relationships where you're just so in love, and then it's just not a fit.
Yeah.
And that's a almost harder grief in a way. Not that I, measure, because it doesn't serve me. But, in a way, I said this to many friends when they're really, really heartbroken, because there's this belief that they could do something to change it. I can't do anything that's going to bring my brother back or my dad or my friend. It's tangible, it's hard, it's permanent. And so that is sort of this one gift in it. I sort of would spiral more in those romantic settings where if I changed, could it work? Or
Yeah.
is there a way I can earn the love back? Because I also just felt like I was in such a deficit, especially with, it does not surprise me. I'm often talking to psychologists and I'm always like, you don't need a psychologist to say, but it does not surprise me that within my own fluidity, that I was just falling in love with one woman after another, through high school and into college. Again, I acknowledge that it was also more socially accepted, that wasn't the download I was getting outwards. But then after losing my brother and my father, that need for male attention and male love and male energy in my life, it just that part of my fluidity obviously just rose to the top of just, there's a true deficit, and all I'm dealing with is grieving women in my family. So it's really interesting how it kind of shows up that way. But I think, I think that it would be very difficult to be grieving in the traditional way or in any way, and show up for support and get any sort of a sense that someone thinks you're less than, or that they don't align with who you are. Not who you choose to be, who you are. It's 2022. That's not up for grabs anymore. This is who somebody is, and they've been broken by grief. And so the idea of entering any sort of, hetero or religious environment that isn't even acknowledging who you are on earth, I can only imagine. So of course, calling for, and even within, we're at a place now where it's not about LGBTQ or not, it's about each of those letters and the specific experiences that each of those people go through. It's like we're getting to this beautiful moment where that acronym, although it's powerful and diverse overall, there are such specific needs, grief processes, and mental health challenges for each of those people. All the folks need support in their own way. And so it is a cool moment that we're getting to a place with organizations like Trevor Project and whatnot, where a white male gay who's been successful in Hollywood and, in the book world and tech, it does not have the same outlook as someone who's in the middle of a transition, or like it's so we're getting to this really cool point where it's even can be more specific, and the relationship dynamics for gay men or bisexual men are totally different than for same-sex females. It's just so
Yeah.
it's cool because it's kind of in the last 10 years like really opened up, and now I believe there's the opportunity for it to get granular, and I'm really excited about that. I'm really noticing that that's happening. Like, it's easy to get on and sort of say, well, things haven't moved enough, but like I can't know what they've been doing over at the Trevor Project or GLAAD or all these organizations. I mean, they have moved the needle. People have homes and places to go, and it's starting to look a little bit more like what I naturally felt growing up when it came to the way my parents viewed love and how they supported their children and whoever they were, as they should, because they made me. You literally made me, like it's almost too logical. But it's very odd to say this, but when it comes to support, I'm getting excited because the suicide numbers are too high, especially for LGBTQ youth, especially for anyone male identifying. I mean, they've been going up. Obviously, we have this social media in there and we're disconnected and we're all grieving different things. So, but I am excited because finally people are really noticing and showing up, and I really think the shift is just going to continue. And people are, and most important than anything, if you're grieving or if you're suffering through a loss or heartbreak or anything, you want to feel like you can go home somewhere,
Yeah.
and be able to share. So I love that. And I love that, people say to me, there isn't really any young male or LGBT voices in the grief space right now. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I mean, when it comes to grief, I mean, LGBTQ people have to know so much. I mean, because you're, like you were saying, in that old way of thinking, you're forced into grieving a fairy tale that you never wrote or wanted.
Yeah.
you know, and that's this is funny because like I get very passionate about that. What is the movie the 10-year-old version of me needed to see? I want to make sure that gets made. What is the book where we're not grieving or grappling with gayness being a problem, other people accepting it, HIV, like, you know, there's these stigmatized topics, and I just feel like we're at a point where what we really need is our version of Notting Hill. We need our version of these stories that said, yeah, it's cool, it's badass, and there's love for you. There's tons of it. And, you know, you can trust. And I think a lot of the dynamics in relationships, especially for gay men, that mistrust comes from this idea that there was something inherently wrong with it to begin with. And so being able to trust your queerness in general is like something that, you know, we could write a whole nother book about that. You could take all these experiments and just do that with it, you know, grieving this idea of what someone says you were going to be and you weren't, but that's just not true. You were always exactly who you are, you know. Yeah, sorry, I get really like, you know, that comes from my mom. Whenever I think the world is, it's just hard enough and we're all grieving and struggling enough. The idea of anyone saying to anyone that they don't belong, that they don't have a home here on our earth to live and breathe and be, yeah, you don't want to sit next to me at the dinner table doing that, because luckily I grew up knowing better and the value of how it's totally different when anyone is welcome at the table, you know. So I yeah,
you sound like, you know the Rumi poem, The Guest House. Do you know it?
I do, yeah.
Every day a new guest, you know, and it's all these emotions we go through, and just invite them in, let them in. And you sound like that in so many different levels. It's
What a
wonderful.
compliment, sounding like that.
It's yeah, it's with grief, you know, when people say to me, here's a fact, what do you think? You're a grief therapist. And I'm almost always, I go, yeah and no. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
There's no truth, you know. It's like, here, yes, there, no. We need to constantly take in so many layers and a full spectrum of possibilities to answer any questions about grief. And I would say to people listening, you know, anyone who says, here's what it looks like and here's what the experience is, they're lying. You know,
yeah, and don't trust them.
there are 7
There's
billion.
no way.
There's 7 billion possible experiences to have. And one of the first questions I ask, like when people come to me looking for support, and it's usually because their grief is really hard, you know, it's usually because they're in that 40% who need more than just family, friends, and community. They need, they feel like they need extra support because maybe someone has died tragically through suicide or homicide, or the death has been unexpected, or the relationship has been tricky, or their own makeup makes it hard for them to accept the reality of the loss. But one of the things that I ask early on is, you know, what do you want your grief to look like in 12 months? What's your vision for yourself? This has happened. You know, the future assumptions you had about what your life was going to look like, they're shattered, they're gone. But, you know, accepting the fact that it is raining or that this has happened, what's the best possible outcome? You know, and I think it's so helpful to visualize that. And for some people, it is, I want to talk about them and feel love rather than these current stabbing pains, you know. It's like, okay, well, that's feasible, you know, maybe not in a year, but as a goal somewhere down the line, that you want to be able to, you know, and maybe your heart will be full of love and the tears will be flowing. We're not talking about bypassing grief here, but it's like the suffering. You know, we can handle grief, but this perpetual suffering that happens when we're looking outside ourselves for someone else to make it better, for someone or something to fix it. We can't accept this is true. How do I get over this? How do I get around this? That causes a huge amount of suffering. When we pause, when we turn, when we face, when we let it flood through us, it's painful. It's emotional. but it's freeing. It's like
Yeah.
it's just giving it place in
And
our
I think,
system, you know.
yeah, that's the sort of, I guess that's the piece. If anyone could get a takeaway from this from me, is it's exactly what you're saying, and bring back that lightheartedness always of going, would I be mad at this person if they just told me it was raining when it actually is raining? You know, that is the truth of this being like a lifelong process in that way. What I would like to bring into the world and into the space is in that honoring. So, you know, if you're gonna beg and bargain like we talked about, or, you know, screaming, or just being in an absolute emotional rut, you know, having that little check-in after each time, you know, and learning from it is the difference. And not judging it, but just learning from it each time, rather than it being sort of this, the rest of your life swirl of grief. You know, start to break it down the same way you consume television in episodes. What happened in this episode? And can we find an end to this episode? Not an end to the grief, but an end, you know, start to structure it a little bit like that, and just remaining really curious. You know, it's like, whoa, like sometimes when I'm screaming and crying and it still happens, I know it will happen again. I mean, there's just going to be a part of me that's always going to, you know, not feel 100% okay, obviously, with what's been lost and who's been lost. But, you know, now the difference is it's like, whoa, I totally lost it. And I would sort of like just ignore it and shut down and hope that it would never happen again. And now it was like that one, you know, everyone has when they're crying, they sort of repeat something out loud. And I spent a lot of years not focusing or listening to what I was saying out loud, you
What
know.
were you saying?
And, you know, it will be different every time, you know, but even in that, when I remember very distinctly one time, just over and over, I needed to stop. I needed to stop hurting. I needed to stop hurting. I needed to stop hurting. And you could dismiss that, but then when I really looked back at that, I was talking about the physical pain that my body was in. And without, you know, no one was physically hurting me. So there were things, as I calmed down, there were things leading up to that moment that I could have done to reframe the idea that I was physically in pain. You know, I got there as, you know, but there's things we can do to sort of clear that space in the chest. And, you know, and it's, you know, or we can really, you know, have that feeling and honor it, and then come out of it going, okay, what was that really? You know, what am I calling for here? And it's okay, so if it's not just to get them back, it's what am I really missing here? Okay, love. Okay, I'm really missing love. Where else does love still exist?
Yeah.
It's not making it better. It's not, you know, skipping to that. It's going, where can I get it from? I really
I
want my
meet my
dad.
need.
You know, yeah, what is the need? You know, and your mind wants to go, no, I need dad back. I need to talk to dad about this. It's like, okay, well, where else is love available? You
Yeah.
know, and can we still get love in this moment,
Yeah.
even if it's not that specific love, you know? And there's so many, Brene Brown talks about this, but it's so funny that we use that word, and like, you know, she says the Germans have, in their language, they have every different kind of love. And I think that's so important with grief, to bring awareness to that. It's like you can feel so loved in one way and then totally need for a different type of love at the same time, and being grief about that. Just had that experience in Australia. I was with my mother and my sisters. I've never felt more loved in the last 5 years. Finally, we got to gather, 3 years of lockdown, you know, you feel that love. And, you know, I was planning a trip, and we were talking about whether or not I would go and venture off. And I've been nomading for quite a while. And I just like had to acknowledge, like, I felt so loved, but there's a part of me that's really ready for this romantic love again. Like, I'm grieving that I'm not grieving my last relationship. I'm grieving that romantic love doesn't exist in my life. And that's something that can exist, you know, but it's only in the moments when you slow it down and notice that you're like, whoa, I feel fully loved in this way, but I'm really missing that. And both are okay. And how do I bring more of that into my life? Or how do I show up to what I'm calling for? And sometimes, as I said, when you're screaming and crying in the night, you're literally saying out loud what you want and what you
Yeah.
need, you
Yeah. And
know?
to listen to that, like you're making so many amazing, beautiful points, Addison. It's wonderful. There's two things I wanted to share that you've made me think about that might be useful to someone. And it's the first one is we talked about hope and hopelessness.
Hmm.
And actually, I think, you know, hope is important. I think hopelessness is also important, you know. And I remember my father died last year, and there was a couple of friends that I was cross with, because it was during COVID. It was, we weren't able to have people at the funeral. I wasn't able to have people around while he was dying. It's that community you talked about when your brother was
Yeah.
dying. And I know it's different when it's someone younger, but we didn't have any of that, and we didn't have that at the funeral. And that was okay. Dad was 92. He had a good life. I'm able to say this. Other people can't say it to me. I can say it about my own grief. But you know, when it came to the funeral, people weren't able to be there. And then not only were they not there because they couldn't be, but some of them didn't show up online to his funeral. And I didn't know that this would be a thing until it was a thing. I was like, three close friends, were at their freaking yoga class while I was burying my father. And I was angry with them,
Yeah.
And this was almost eating me more than the grief was. It's like, damn, I work as a grief therapist. I know it's important. It's important to have my friends here. Fuck them. Where are they? And I remember speaking with my supervisor about 2 weeks later, and I spoke with my friends, and I said, you know what, I'm actually really pissed off with you. That's not good enough. It's not good enough to ring and say, oh, I wish I could be there, and then go to your yoga class instead of being online and texting me and going, I'm here, my hands in your back, I'm with you. So I did say it to them, and they had just not thought about it, thought it through. They thought watching the replay would be good enough. But I'm coming to my point, speaking with my supervisor about 2 weeks later, and he said, I haven't seen you since your dad died, and how are you doing? And I said, I'm going through this process. I'm really like, I don't want to take on this anger, but I have it. I'm really furious, And I said, one friend, I was there for her when her parent died, and I did this, and this. And she, haven't seen her. It's been 2 weeks. I haven't seen her. She hasn't called. And there was a silence. And he just said, God, people are just so selfish, really, aren't they? And I was sitting there going, it's not really the answer I wanted, but it was so helpful. It was so helpful, because in that moment, I just shared, I went, yeah, we are. I've been the friend who didn't show up. I've been the friend who didn't call. I've been the friend, and still am, who rolls my eyes when someone needs something again or more. We all are. Like, I've also been an amazing friend at other times, but we all have our lives that we're going through, and, rewriting our address books because somebody hasn't shown up in a moment really is not a good idea, I think. It might organically happen, but, when you experience profound loss, do we have to lose everyone else as well? And I'm curious to what your thoughts might be around that, about, being able to notice, wow, they haven't been able to show up for me.
Yeah, I mean, so the one thing I will say is that that's one place where the compounded grief did provide learning, with how I interacted with other people. And I went through sort of every phase, and I feel like like we were talking about earlier, there are these sort of grief phases where you're very focused on what everyone else is doing and when they're not, how they're supporting you. And we can go through this. I do find with that specifically that I would just sort of want to give everyone sort of this buffer tool to add to their toolkit, and just notice, again, without the judgment, and wait. Because what I think is happening, again, this is from a pure perspective of just my own 13 years in the grief arena, but now I notice that a lot of my anger, my judgment, my focus on others was almost a direct maneuver of my own mind, so that I didn't have to focus on that feeling we were talking about of how much it hurt in my chest, and that I would have to live without somebody that I definitely did not want to live without. Especially at that age, I felt so young to lose my brother and my father. I mean, if I were to then live a quote unquote normal lifespan, I mean, that could be 60 years, without them. And that came out, admittedly, in a lot of ways that were not in my highest integrity, especially when I was younger. And it came through vices. We do, sometimes it's directed at other people. Sometimes we're numbing in different ways. We're distracting in different ways. Like I was dangerously sort of in the best years of my life from an outward perspective when I, needed all of these distractions and things. Like, it's just your mind is forming as it's going. So it's whenever you can kind of take the pause and go, what is this really about? What do you really want here? Again, do you really want them to be sorry and it's hard for me because I nod and I understand, and there's only so much empathy we can have for others while needing and wanting empathy for where we're at in our journey, and that is such a difficult dance. One thing that I try to do is just make sure that when I do sort of get overheated or triggered by my grief, and then I'm just sort of judging things in a way that I wouldn't be judging them with my normal mind, and that happened a lot. Is the difference for me was then the commitment to making amends with integrity, to be the type of person that then will have the talk about a month later and say, this is what was going on for me. That is not the way I would have reacted in that moment, and still have boundaries. I really did want you to be there, and this is what support would have looked like for me in that moment. If I ever am grappling with loss again, please, if you can give me a little bit of grace, and this is what support looks like for me. That's the number one thing I always get asked is, they say, what do you do for a grieving person? And I say, ask them, what does support look like for you right now in this moment? Because sometimes it's just, please sit beside me and stay in the room. Don't leave the room, but please don't talk. Please don't try to fix anything. Can you just be here? Or I really need to eat. It sounds crazy, but I really think it's life and death about eating. That's what support is in that moment. I need you to drive me to my doctor. I need you to help me make an appointment sooner. These things. What that one thing is that's going to sort of make it so it's not so heavy, so unbearable in that moment. That's what we can do for each other. It's again, for the supporter, I think a lot of people, again, in retrospect, get paralyzed by, they can't help you, they can't fix this for you. It scares the crap out of them that they're going to lose their dad, or they already have, and it's triggering them. It's so about everyone's individual experience, just like all of our grief processes are not the same. So, I mean, again, this is not easy. This is a daily honoring of me constantly going, okay, like from their perspective, what's going on? And also there's the thing that I would say to anybody who's younger, who's experiencing a lot of loss, is be careful how used to that attention you get. Because I will say, in a way, sometimes it feels like I had like a TV show. I mean, because people just really supported me. I was like, I had the worst thing that you could have happen, their words, not mine, happening again and again. People couldn't believe it. So it's constantly, again, privileged outside of a COVID world at the time, where I could be surrounded in hospital rooms where we could gather. And I think that's such a big thing. To your point, community is such an important part of grief. And that's one thing that's been threatened. That's the reason that I wanted to put the book out there, because it was the first time, whereas they don't even have the casseroles, the condolences, and the flowers. They don't even have the gatherings right now. So they really do need that friend who kind of gets it. And I think that's the thing, is there's this immediate focus. And I think we know that grief kind of really starts in the silence, when people start to dissipate. That's where you really start to begin your lifelong journey with grief. That's where you really, and it's you and you. And I think that focusing on other people, honestly, is like our beautiful soul trying to fight the moment where we're going to get to that silence, where it's just going to be real and it's going to be us with ourselves. And I have done everything in the book to avoid that silence. So I say that like fully, including focus so heavily on someone else's behavior. It's just one of those things where maybe I wouldn't hurt that bad if they had shown up like this. And it's like, is that really true? Would it really make it, it's that moment.
We have this primary loss of the person who dies, and then the secondary losses of our disappointments of people not being how we want them to be when we're hurting. And I think, just like grief, if we can accept it without focusing the next decade of our lives of trying to change society, one of the things you're saying there is, not only do the people who want to support need to step in more, and ideally, but also we as grievers need to be able to say, here's how I Here's
Mhm.
how I need support. We can't expect people to read our minds. And
Mhm.
just like you, the teenager, couldn't really conceptualize what your brother's death would be like until it happened, because you'd never gone through it. The fact that people around our grief can't conceptualize what it's like for us,
Mhm.
it's not their fault, it's not wrong,
No, yeah.
and to that anger is not good for us.
Mhm.
So how can we help them, and maybe not fully understand our grief, but at least make a bloody lasagna,
And yeah, and also that is so human. There's nothing more human than me leveling with you and saying, I know it kind of seems out of proportion. I am this angry. I am just so angry. And I know that it can't possibly all be because of something you did or didn't do for me, but I am this angry and acknowledging it. And I think that we've hit on something really important there when it comes to the support role and the griever is everything we've been saying today is about how every day you're honoring that relationship. Go back to the weather. So every day, essentially, you need a weather person. You need to be able to say every day what you need. So you might have told somebody and not even realize, sort of in the swirl of emotions, that you just needed time alone, and they think they're honoring that. And then it's been 2 weeks and you're angry that they haven't called and checked in. So there is not that we need any more responsibility or pressure, especially in those first, months of grief, but just keeping in mind that from the second you experience a loss that is going to be publicly witnessed or publicly supported, that you're being given this little card that says, as my coach Jen Merrifield used to say, you teach people how to treat you. So from this moment, and they will surprisingly do, for the most part, what exactly you teach them to do. That's the odd part. And it's like, yeah, it goes into that sort of trap of grief thinking of, wouldn't it just be great if so and so didn't die? Wouldn't it be great if everyone just showed up exactly how I wanted them to? Can't anyone just do and it's like that trap is there for you on the first day. It is there for me 14 years later. It is just something that every time I have to go back to that grace and integrity and like just as much humor as I can gather around. It's really not that personal. It's really not. And especially now we've entered into this pandemic possible world where everyone is grieving the loss of something meaningful. So in some ways, people might be feeling a real deep state of grief of what they found meaningful, whether it was their ability to gather for yoga, whatever it is, and being trumped by physical death grief, because that's something our society says, like, oh, this is real grief. But the one thing I always go back to is everyone is grieving in some way. Everyone is constantly processing and honoring the loss of something meaningful or someone. And so sometimes it's easier in conversation when we have this, like I said, this tangible death, because it's something society reflects with these rites of passage, but everyone is sort of grieving at the same time. So we're all kind of birding together in that, and that, if anything, I hope makes people feel more connected, that it's actually not from a total misunderstanding of what's going on. It's an avoidance of everything your experience is touching on for them, and that's, again, just like admitting how angry you are, is very human. It's just very, very human. And when you can get down to the core of something being very, very human, I feel like there's a lot more peace on both sides.
Absolutely.
And such a process, such a process. It's not easy. Like, I'm not like platituding anyone. It's
But it
not
saves
easy.
the relationship as well, and I think me expressing my anger to these two very close friends separately was me saving my relationship with them.
Absolutely.
It was me going, you matter to me, so you need to know, what's going on.
Yeah.
But on that note as well, the second thing I wanted to share was when you talk there about, someone dying and we love them and there's a loss of love, and then identifying, okay, I have this need for love. And I know I went through a less significant loss, but it was significant nonetheless a few months ago, a relationship that didn't work out. And I was really, really in the pit, if you like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And two of my friends just instinctively, like when they would be calling me to check in on me, they'd just be like, I love you, Liz, I love you, as I was there kind of sobbing on the phone. And that was such a balm,
Mm-hmm.
so like, we think we have to come up with some clever existential quote to soothe somebody's grief,
Mm,
actually just, I'm sorry, I love you, I'm here.
yeah, just
And
acknowledgement of the
mean it.
experience. Yeah.
No, and mean it is just, yeah, just there's still love in your life. You still have
Mhm.
love. You are loved. You know, someone still has your back. That can be so, so powerful.
I think and it's the seed of people ask me a lot, like how I'm so deeply connected to so many people. And I think there's something exactly what you're saying about it, because I try to go back and look at it and be like, well, what does happen? And a little, a big part of it is when I'm there with you, I'm really showing up with you in that moment. And that just has this like ability to create such a deep, deep bond. It's exactly what you're saying. It's so different when someone's rushing to fix or change or, to alleviate the stress they have of not being able to help you, other than like I said, like it's weird. I always go back and I remember the most supported I ever felt was no talking, but don't leave the room.
Mm.
Like, stay with me in this uncomfortable room where people die and life is hard and my heart aches. Just be in this room with me, because I feel like you get to choose when you leave the room, because it's not your brother, it's not your dad. You're not in physical pain from an accident all the time. And I so badly want that privilege, but it means so much to me if you'll stay in this room with me. And I think that's really, really hard to ask for. And sometimes by the time we know that's what we want to ask for, which is the whole reason I tried to go back and write the book, is it's much later. So cluing in a little earlier, getting this book on the first day, going, okay, what's really happening here, and how do I ask for the support I need, is just so different. It's just a key to a door that just wouldn't exist if no one handed it to you. So I
Let's talk
think
about the book, actually, for anyone
ooh,
looking on
you
YouTube.
got it.
I got it. And oh, there's so many amazing quotes in here. Tell our listeners about the book, would you?
Yeah, so really what the book is, what you guys have probably gathered after 13 years, every time I heard that somebody had lost somebody or was dealing with loss, I would just freeze. I didn't want to tell them what they were really up against, and I just kind of felt uncomfortable. I was like, everyone, in a pre-pandemic world shows up in the moment, and then like we were talking about, there's that silence after. And as much as you want to keep other people involved, as much as our communities try to support us, for those of us who have that type of community, in the end, this is really a journey with you and you, and what's been lost. And so I wanted to give something that somebody could get in that moment, and they could be introduced to me, because so often people would call and say, hey, so and so's been through this, would you talk to them? And quite honestly, like, if I'm going to thrive within my own grief, I can't spend all my time talking to people who are newly entering grief. I mean, that's just a very heavy space, and it's not my profession. So it was like, okay, if I were to show up on day one, how would I show up? And as a peer in this space, what would I really offer as another friend who gets it? Not. And when I say that, I don't mean as someone who claims to know your experience. It's just as someone who knows that after the flowers or the funeral or whatever you do, that's just the beginning. And that's what I'm acknowledging, that this is going to be a journey. And so what I did was basically did something where I would be with them for the first 7 days, and then something they could return to weekly. And I just kind of lightly bring up an idea and then offer what's truly a grief experiment. Spend the week experimenting with this. How does it shift? How does it change, your relationship to your grief? And it's all things that, as I said, I went to the ends of the earth to find for myself. And I developed tools out of these experiments, and just remaining curious, compassionate, and kind, and that it's always going to be an experiment. It's just I constantly try to remind throughout the book that what we're really learning to do is to honor and find that agency from awareness, that action that we talked about earlier, in a gentle way. And it's not in a prescriptive way. So everything is you will form your own learning and your own ideas about, and you can dive deeper into something, into the concept. I'm in the process of creating a podcast myself that will dive deeper on each experiment with who I might consider an expert, as a launching point, so people can dive deeper, because that's already been asked for. But I just wanted it to be this really human thing. And even if you give it to someone, it really is, I really did design it for the gifter, because I feel like the people supporting those who are grieving are the ones who always feel at such a loss of what to offer. And, you know, I say it doesn't matter if they read it, you know, it's not the first year, it's not linear time. It's the first year they want to get curious and get to know themselves again. It starts on the day it starts, right? So even if it's just a physical reminder that sits in your house, every time you look at my book, if nothing else, I just hope you remember, it's not something I fix, it's something I honor, and go again with your day. You know, even if you're not, because the last thing I want is, because it's slightly structured, it to become another thing that you feel any sort of failure around, or that you're
Yeah,
not doing. Yeah, you know,
yeah.
it's like not meant to feed into that at all.
Looks like
It's
something
really
you
like,
pick up and see what you land on, and there's
yeah,
something
you can also do it. A
beneficial.
lot of people are doing that just randomly. They flip to a page and see sort of what the gift in it is, and that's the idea of it being physical, is I'm there whenever you pick it up. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, a scheduled Zoom or time with me, you know. So
And it's called
I hope that's what it's achieving. You know, obviously book sales are wonderful, and everybody loves that. And it's been amazing to see how well received it is. And also it's the little messages that I get of just like, you know, this really helped. And I'm like, I even forgot that was in there, you know. And if it, I kind of was fulfilled when I heard from the first person, who wasn't someone who, like, you know, is in my family,
Yeah,
you know, praising, but the first person to say, hey, like, I really feel like you get what I'm going through and this is helpful.
yeah.
um it's like, okay, then that's why it exists and that's why it's out there. And I just want it to be available for people, you know. They'll still get enough lasagnas and flowers if you opt to send this.
It's called First Year of Grief Club, A Gift from a Friend Who Gets It by Addison Brasil.
Mhm.
Addison, it's been such an honor and a privilege and a joy to speak to you. The overarching message that I feel is coming today is, you know, it's like it's not our fault when someone dies, you know, but
Mm,
it is our responsibility to choose how we grieve,
mm,
you know. And I think at a certain point, it's, you know, we mightn't be able to access that choice,
mhm,
but we need to listen for it. Listen to those choice points of, is this the only way? You know, um, we can navigate our grief. We can take
mhm.
agency and take responsibility. And it's not to say you don't grieve or you get over it or any of those things. That's not what I'm saying. But you know,
Mhm.
there's ways to run a marathon. You can not train and just
Yep.
scramble through and hope someone will drag you along, or you can just keep getting up and,
I
you
Yeah, I
know,
agree.
you know,
I think there's the opportunity for it to be a gentle responsibility, you
yeah,
know, for something where we can, like, you know, if you break down responsibility, you might think like something I need to do or I have to do. If we could start to think about it as breaking down into those three words I keep bringing up: curious, kind, compassionate. It's
yeah,
like a gentle responsibility. But you're absolutely right, you know, this is a marathon that truthfully we all know we will eventually run. I mean, there's only one absolute truth that we know, and it's if we live, that we die, you know? So it's something that, you know, like I said in my own story, you can prepare in different ways. You could take these experiments and have them before, but also just know that, like, when the marathon starts, it starts that day, and it's not going anywhere. So there are things we can do, you know, to
yeah,
show up to it, and when we're ready and on our own time. But I will say that time did not heal all wounds for me. Awareness and badass action
yeah.
led to me being able to manage my wounds and care for them and nourish myself
And the wounds
in
you're
a way
still
that's
caring
sustainable.
for. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And to say, like with any marathon, the more people who can be at the sidelines or handing
Hmm.
us water or giving us a gentle hand on the shoulder, the better. You know, I'm not saying
Yeah.
you've got to do this on your own, but, you know, just find that agency, which
Hmm.
could be ringing someone saying, I can't do this on my own, come over, you know,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like for you. But, you know, there's great freedom, I think, and possibilities. Um, Suffering from profound loss does not need to be a pall on your entire life. It's certainly going to be there, but the shape it will take and the flavor, to a degree, you can mold that to a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And beautiful full circle shapes of grief. You brought it right around. Look at you. This is why you get the big bucks.
Well, the reason I chose shapes of grief was to actually move away from just bereavement. You know, that there's so many shapes of grief, you know, whatever that looks like, you know, whether it's, you know, a redundancy or losing someone to mental health issues or a mastectomy after cancer. There's so many types of loss and so many ways to grieve. Yeah. Addison, it's been a real honor. That was a long one. And I know that so many people will really benefit today. So thanks so much for your presence.
Thank you so much too. It's been an honor to be here. And mygriefclub.com is the easiest way to kind of find me in the book, if everyone's looking for that. Because I think Amazon doesn't come to Ireland, right? So there's other ways that I've got to set it up.
We have Amazon. We have the
so then maybe you can get it.
We have the wheel and fire also.
You know, you'd be surprised. New Zealand doesn't have Amazon.
Really?
Yeah. No, it's sorry, I don't mean Amazon generally, like where the book can be like received from, I guess it is. But yeah, and I'm pretty accessible, and I'm always interested to see how it's going for people. So please reach out and let me know. And if there's a blocker to getting a book, someone on my team, we will figure it out and get it to you. So yes.
Tell us that you have a team, but send me all your links.
I will, yes.
I'll put them. And if you could figure out then how to purchase the book. I mean, Ireland, the Irish audience is about 30% of the podcast. We've 30% in North America and about 30% in the UK. So if you could send me links for where all of those regions could purchase.
Absolutely, we'll make it as easy as possible.
And for all your online stuff, that would be super. And I'll put it in the description of today.
Perfect. Thank you for the safe space. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Addison.